I'm so excited to have Sophie back on the podcast. We are talking about a different topic this time, and it's been about 2 years we were just talking about since she's been on the podcast. So a lot has changed between that time. And our topic today is self advocacy is patient advocacy, challenging systems and changing outcomes. Sophie, thank you so much for coming back on.
Thank you, Vanita, for having me. I'm so excited. You're my first podcast, so I think that really boosted my confidence in speaking out for
I
our
love that.
patients, students, and clients.
Amazing. Yeah, it just takes like one time, right?
Yeah.
And I can already see a difference. I was so impressed. You're going to see Sophie provided us with so many article references at the end, and we will be sharing those. But here are our learning outcomes for today. So you'll be able to define the role of clinician self advocacy and explain its impact on patient outcomes and family trust. Identify two systematic barriers in early intervention and disability services that disproportionately affect disabled individuals, families, and frontline providers. Describe reforms that promote equitable, sustainable, and person centered disability services over administrative efficiency. And identify two actionable strategies clinicians can use to advocate for systematic change while protecting their licenses, livelihoods, and mental health. Here's our agenda for today. We are starting with introductions and backgrounds. Then we'll get into defining clinician self advocacy and its impact. Then identifying systematic barriers in disability services. Next, describing reforms for equitable and person centered care. And then identifying actionable advocacy strategies before we wrap up with references and closing remarks. Sophie, can you come on and share a little bit about your background if someone has not listened to the last episode that we've done?
Sure. So my name is Sophie Anais Renoir. Sophie is perfectly fine. I am a Black multilingual and chronically ill speech language pathologist. I'm from Long Island, so those are the suburbs right outside of New York City. I have worked in almost every single setting across the lifespan, from itty bitty babies to end of life care. I have really been honored and blessed to advocate for ourselves as healthcare providers and the families we serve. In this time since we've last met, Vanita, I have really been advocating for early intervention and CDPAP reform in my state. And CDPAP is the Consumer Directed Patient Assistance Program. So in many states, they have programs where individuals who are disabled or elderly can choose their own aid. So you could choose a family member or a friend to be your aid. And that's what that program is. And the issues in both of those systems in my state are connected. And advocacy is personal for me because I know what it's like to be on the other end of the bedside. So I've had to advocate for myself. So I'm in a unique position to advocate for our colleagues and for our patients, students, and clients.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really admire your passion for advocacy. And I can see you doing a lot in this area as your career evolves even more. Forgive my ignorance, but what is the TSSLD?
Oh, okay. So many states, I believe it's about only 10 states in the US don't require a separate teacher certification or a speech language pathologist. So the TSSLD is the teacher of student for speech and language disabilities, and the BE is just the bilingual extension attached to that. So the TSSLD, you have to have that if you want to work in any New York State schools, and the bilingual extension again is only for the schools, and that's the only, if you don't have that, you can't consider yourself a bilingual practitioner in the school systems in New York State.
Got it. All of the New York SLP listening to this are like, come on, Vanita. But I'm from Florida and it is not required where we live. So, and I haven't actually seen it in all of the like interviews that I've done. I just think that maybe some people don't include it, but it absolutely should be included.
It's possible they don't include it, and also, unfortunately, so most programs have it integrated, but there are some programs that make it optional to get. However, usually that's not advised in case you can't find a job in your ideal setting. It's always good to have that. And then there are those few instances if a school can't provide the services, sometimes SLPs in outpatient or in hospitals have it and use it if the patient is getting those funds to
Got
be
it.
there. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And if you are here for Sophie, my name is Vanita Litvak. I go by she, her. I've been an SLP since 2014. I'm a host of this podcast, and which is part of the Tassel Learning Network. I am the CE content consultant for Tassel, supporting course development for professionals. I'm also an owner of a private practice specializing in early intervention, AAC, and autism. And I'm a student at Northwestern University. I am also expecting and due in June. So if I seem tired or, just need to take a deep breath, that's probably what's happening here, but you can't see from here down. I'll share my financial disclosures and then I will let Sophie share hers. So I have ownership interest in Species Side Up LLC and Tassel Learning LLC. How about you, Sophie?
So I'm receiving an honorarium for this presentation, and I'm a member of the Council for Exceptional Children, the New York State Speech Language Hearing Association, and the Long Island Speech and Hearing Association. And I'm on the social media and brochure committees of LISHA. So we'll talk a lot more about why professional associations are important.
Okay, yeah, I'm excited to hear more about that. So this topic is on self-advocacy. Why is it essential for clinicians, and how does our ability to advocate for ourselves affect patient and family outcomes?
So if we don't know how to advocate for ourselves, how are we going to advocate for our patients, students, and clients? And that first comes from outside of our advocating for our roles in our job. Just as a person, when you are going to your doctor, your provider, do you know how to protect yourself? Do you know how to express that this doesn't sound right, or I'm not sure about this? Because that's often how our patients and their families are feeling. But oftentimes it's that fear of we're in a position of power. And in many cultures, they will go along with what you say if you are a healthcare provider. And in our roles as speech language pathologists, oftentimes SLPs are complaining, well, the OTs and the PTs, they always have all these things, and I can't even get access to pencils or fees or all those things in our work environments. And it often is true. I like to compare, like, PT is the heir, and then OT is the spare, and then SLPs are often like the stepchild. That unfortunately, a lot of places look at us in a hierarchy, even though There is no hierarchy in healthcare, even when it comes to doctors and other disciplines. Really, healthcare and in our work in the schools and in other settings, it's an interconnected web of collaboration. And we can't wait for someone else to speak up for ourselves. And oftentimes, SLPs will say, well, the National Association, they should be doing more for us. And the National Association is okay to be criticized. And yes, they, in certain areas, they could be doing more. However, they do things that are very important, but also they're not the only avenue to turn to. You yourself have a voice. It's just knowing how to use your voice. And it only takes one person. Most of the time, a lot of people are thinking the same thing, and you just have to make that push. And you have to come together because it is scary to speak up. It's scary because you don't know, are people going to see me as the problem? Am I going to get in trouble? Could I lose my job? But this is within our role. And if we're not using that, how are we truly serving an entity of the needs of our patients, students, and clients?
That makes sense. It makes sense that if we're not able to advocate for ourselves, then how can we advocate for our clients? It's like the squeaky wheel is the one that gets listened to a lot of like if we're talking about families in a school system, for instance. But it is difficult because I know you were sharing a personal story with me, and I feel the same that it's really important to advocate for ourselves, but sometimes it feels like you're up against a wall. And yeah, other people tend to be like more cautious when speaking out. And so if it's you on an island by yourself, it can make it seem like to leadership that it's just an isolated problem when really it's like systematic.
Yeah. And then one of the things I recommend is forming alliances with the families, because if the families are saying the same thing you're saying to whoever's in charge, whoever's in administration, then it's not just going to be, oh, that therapist is the problem. Then there's record, okay, I have this parent, then this therapist and this therapist. And when the parents are on your side and you're on their side, it's really hard for administrators to ignore that, because then it can turn up and unfortunately into an uproar. And when the schools, it could turn into lots of parents are coming to the school board meetings and are very angry. It could turn into, for practices or hospitals, patients not coming to this facility, going somewhere else, or leaving many bad reviews. And at the end of the day, administrators don't want problems. They don't want people to be upset. And when it's a collective effort, then it's a little bit easier. But I'm not going to say it's like this is a walk in the park. It's not. It's not.
Yeah. And sometimes it leads, unfortunately, sometimes it leads to, I don't want to say like negative outcomes. I think in the long term ends up benefiting, but sometimes like the person that's advocating doesn't see those long-term benefits initially, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because it can cause tension.
For sure.
Yeah.
In my program right now, it's the class that I'm taking is about like organization and systematic processes. And one of the big takeaways is that when there's a problem within an organization, it's never an individual, it's always the system,
Mhm.
but it's like how you advocate for that systematic change that is going to make a difference. And this reminded me, we were reading an article this week. Let me see if I can find it. But it's about what's called just culture versus like a culture of blame. And so, if anybody is dealing with workplace issues right now, I would highly recommend reading this article and just understanding like what a just culture looks like and maybe why you're feeling like you are in an unsafe environment, because when it's a culture of blame, then it starts to threaten your psychological safety as well. And then that's not healthy. And then
Yeah.
speaking about how it affects your patient and family outcomes, if you're not feeling psychologically safe, how can you ensure that your clients are feeling psychologically safe as well? Right.
Yep, absolutely.
So the author that tends to like speak on this topic, I think he's done TED Talks and out of Harvard. His name is Atul Gawande. So Atulgawande. And anything that he's done on YouTube or in writing can talk a little bit more about that just culture. But I just wanted to share that because it's been really fascinating this past week, and I feel like it really aligns with what we're talking about today.
Yeah. And I just want to touch on just one thing briefly. Right now, there has been one of the largest nurses strikes in history in my state, in New York City. And nurses have been on strike for about a month.
Wow.
And several hospital systems, most of the hospital systems have reached a contract with the nurses, but there are still some where they're having issues. And nurses it's been freezing here. Like this week we're getting some relief, but for the past about 3 weeks, the wind chills were in like sub-zero.
Oh my goodness.
There was one day it was warmer in Alaska than it was in New York. At the nurses have been out in the snow, dancing, singing, chanting. They have been out there. And one thing I admire about nurses is they never back down for a fight for themselves or for their patients. And I feel like we can learn a lot from nurses. That again, it all just starts with coming together. And when it's more than one person, like these are nurses from multiple different hospital systems that were all fighting together. And yes, they have a union. But remember, even before any sort of union, whether it's teachers' unions or factory unions were started, all of these things started out informally with people just coming together and voicing their concerns. And
That makes sense.
that can make such a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that this point of contention gets resolved and the nurses get what they're looking for and doesn't last much longer because I can't imagine standing out there in the freezing cold. Okay, so let's talk about the systematic barriers in early intervention and disability services and which ones are most urgently impacting disabled individuals, families, and frontline providers.
Yeah. So, early intervention in all states, it's partially funded by the government and the federal government, partially funded by the states. And across most states, there aren't enough providers for early intervention, mainly because anything government funded tends not to pay the best. My state in New York has been in a crisis for early intervention for about a decade. It's really in the past year and a half, 2 years, the system really has been on the brink of collapse. My state has we have the worst program in terms of timely delivery of services. So what that means is that there is more than a 30-day wait for a child who has been evaluated and approved for services and them actually being serviced by a provider. And right now, most children are aging out of the program before receiving any or all of their services. And unlike in the school system where, if you're not receiving all of your minutes, technically you are entitled to get those minutes made up, or the school district is supposed to give the family those funds to get that through an outside provider. But that's not how it works in early intervention. And the issues in early intervention in terms of pay are not just in New York. Pay is more than just your salary or your hourly wage. It comes down to having to fund your own supplies. Not some places do, but not all places do. Mileage, gas reimbursement, you traveling from home to home takes a toll on your vehicle, or if you're taking public transportation. And then the mental toll, it's a lot being the only person sometimes. You're the only provider families are seeing, and sometimes you end up becoming everything. I have worked in early intervention and I'm working in home health, which is a separate program from early intervention in my state. And I become everything. I become the social worker. I become the PT consult. I become everything because I'm like the only person they are seeing. And also working with a lot of lower income individuals, a lot of immigrant and Black and brown communities. There's that trust because they feel safe with me. And not having a colleague to just breathe with and vent with is a lot on your head because some of these families are really dealing with a lot of heaviness. And working in home health is lonely. Also, we don't know what we're walking into. Every day working in home health is frankly risking your life because there are some situations that are dangerous, unfortunately. Some situations where it, families or the patient have an environment that is not conducive to therapy because it's just not safe. And then because of this, providers don't want to work in those settings. So then those families, particularly lower income, families of color, immigrant families, they tend to be the families that have the longer wait times. And part of it is family providers may not want to work with those families or in those environments. There aren't always multilingual providers. In our profession, only about 8% of SLPs and audiologists are bi or multilingual. And also those families, they tend to have lower levels of health literacy. So they don't always know that would it be possible to ask for telehealth, for example, if they can't find a provider that's willing to come in person. Well, are there other resources like going to a public hospital? Because many of these families that are low income are on Medicaid. So public hospitals accept Medicaid, Medicare, and can they find a provider there? if you have your own health insurance through your job, you can get obviously this is not early intervention, but you can go another route so your child's not continuing to fall behind. And the economic issue is that families who are middle class or affluent can afford to pay for a private provider if they're waiting. Other families can't. And so those kids who don't have that access, the gap is widening even more between them and their typically developing peers.
Yeah, that's terrible. I don't know if you saw our post today, but there was a recent research article that came out of Saskatchewan, Canada, that the children in that area are waiting on average 398 days just for an evaluation for early intervention.
Well,
And so this really aligns with everything that you're talking about here. And what the authors did is they ran different simulations to see like what would help to basically eliminate that wait list. And what they came up with was adding a couple more providers, adding assistants, and doing group therapy,
well,
which I thought was so interesting because I think the majority of early intervention services are done individually, like none are done in group therapy, right? But I imagine like there's other solutions too, like what you were saying with the school system, if they're not able to provide those services, like giving the family funds so that they could go get a private provider. So, yeah, I wonder what's going to unfold from this because it sounds like it's a major issue. I don't know necessarily what our wait lists are in Florida, but it sounds like it's probably pretty long all over.
for New York, it's been so bad that a couple years ago we even had there was like an investigation through the US Education Department because of the long wait for these kids who are getting serviced. There have been different proposals to deal with this issue in New York. The legislature has been very supportive. The governor of the state of New York, however, has deemed some of those things too costly. One of those things was just a study on the program to see what could be done better, which
Mhm.
showed providers were seeking, I think at the highest, we were seeking 16% increase for reimbursement. Then the legislature agreed to about 10%, but then the governor said, no, that's too much. And then it was lowered to 5%. Because right now, the rates are, when you account for inflation, are about equivalent to what they were in the 1990s. So there have been people who have dedicated their entire lives to early intervention and are making less than they did like 30 years ago. I'm 26 years old. I was born in 1999, so this is terrible. And in my state, we do not have slippas. Slippas have been proposed many times in the legislature. Some people, some advocates have been pushing for slippas to be authorized to work in early intervention in New York to deal with this issue. Some pushback has been, oh, we're going to add supervision, more supervision, weight onto SLPs. My opinion is we should have slippas, period. For all the settings, we have PTAs, we have OTAs, and we have RBTs in New York.
Right.
So again, the hierarchy in rehab, the view of our role in therapy. And then another thing that was proposed at the end of last year's legislative session was creating a loan program. So I believe Don't quote me on this, but it's a certain number of service. I can't remember how many years in early intervention, they were going to cover your loans after a certain number of years, similar to how we have public student loan forgiveness through the US Education Department, but this was just going to be a states thing. But again, those are just band-aids. The real issues are, again, the pay, which is including health insurance, days off, gas or transportation, supplies. Would we ever expect a doctor to be buying their own scalpels or stethoscopes? Why do we expect therapists to having to provide their own PPE or their own materials? Yes, we are playing, but again, playing is how children learn. Playing is purposeful. So those toys are our tools. And as well as we're going from home to home, we also need PPE. We need gloves, we need masks, we need sanitizing materials. Many of us are working with medically fragile children who have been discharged from the NICU. And that's another thing I didn't mention was that rates for telehealth were also cut. And group sizes were, I think the number of groups, they were, I don't want to give the wrong information, but there were changes in group sizes as well for group therapy and early intervention, which providers were against. Because telehealth, again, is increasing access because some families don't want people coming into home because their babies are very fragile. Some areas there's difficulty finding a provider. For example, when I presented at my state conference this past spring, there were some therapists that were telling me I'm one of like only two in my county in some of the rural parts of the state, and there's no one else in early intervention. That's how bad it is. And when you cut telehealth reimbursement and when reimbursement is already so low, you're just hurting all of those vulnerable populations.
Yeah, that's terrible. And the wait lists are across the board. It's not just speech and language services, right? It's like in general getting therapy.
Yep. Everything from special education, PTOT, ABA. Yep.
Got it. Okay. Oh man. So let's talk about, I know you have some solutions or proposed suggestions
Got
coming up.
it.
So it's not all doom and gloom if you're
No,
listening to
no,
this or watching it.
no.
So, what reforms are needed to make disability services more equitable, sustainable, and truly centered on disabled people rather than administrative efficiency?
We need to listen to disabled individuals. And I say that specifically, not just their families, because oftentimes families are advocating, which is important, but there's a big difference from being that family member, that caregiver, and then having that disabled life experience.
Mhm.
And for our littles and for our individuals who are non-speaking or individuals who are not cognitively intact, that's different. But for individuals who can e- express themselves, we need to listen to them first. They know what they need. They know what they experience, and they are the experts. Disability is a variation of life. Disability can happen at any time. Some people are born with disability, some people acquire disabilities. Disability often just happens as people get older. So this isn't something that's rare. This is not a burden on society because everyone knows someone or knows of someone that is disabled. And the disability community is the only minoritized group of people you can become part of at any time in your life.
Mm.
And when you don't treat the challenge early on, it exacerbates and it gets more expensive. So my assemblywoman's office, they know who I am. They know me by face and name. My assemblywoman knows who I am because I'm very engaged in these issues. And one of her staffers was telling me last spring that, Sophie, you are so right about how it costs more later on, because it was around time in the spring where schools are voting for their budget. And he was telling me in his town, they had to add a lot more money for special ed services because they were getting an increase of numbers of children with more high needs disabilities because they were not getting service in early intervention. There are some kids who will always need some sort of support, and that's fine because independence isn't always the goal. And in society, we're human beings, we're supposed to be interdependent. So that's not always the goal. But there are some people who may become independent or require lower levels of support if they are given the help early on. So it ends up costing less. And there is more than enough data, and you'll see later on with the articles that are provided, to show that treating these challenges early on is so much cheaper. So when you have the executive branch, in my state at least, saying these things are too expensive, but we're also seeing those things in Washington where when they pass a big, bad, broken bill that is going to be harming disabled individuals and their families. And we're going to see the catastrophic effects of this. There are already hospitals that are concerned about closing. I know in my state, there are about a dozen hospitals, primarily in rural New York, that are at risk of closing because the most of their funding comes from Medicaid and Medicare, because those are the population they are serving. People are more than what they can just do for society. We all are valuable regardless of what state we are in, whether we can work or whether if we need help for the entirety of our life. And you can't put a price on a life. And it is so dehumanizing to see people as dollar signs.
Absolutely. Well, and I think what you're suggesting here by getting individuals or disabled individuals involved in the process, it helps to humanize
Mhm.
them more and see like it's not just paper, but these are the actual people that you're supporting. So I think that's a really great suggestion. So, what actions can clinicians take right now to advocate for change while protecting their licenses, livelihoods, and mental health?
This is within our scope of practice. We are protected. If there are issues, always refer back to the code of ethics. Think about when you're working with someone, by not advocating for them, by not empowering them with information, is the service you're providing ethical? A lot of things, advocacy doesn't just look like you're speaking up or you're calling out a problem in your environment. Advocacy is also making sure the people you're working with are knowledgeable about what resources they have access to, educating them on the laws, educating them on the eligible services, the services they are eligible for, because then they can make that next step. So it's a different avenue because sometimes speaking up is really scary. I know that because I have spoken up and I may look confident in what I've been saying, but deep down inside, I'm like, oh my gosh, what are the consequences? Because I will call out directly but respectfully, I will call things out. When I spoke at a rally regarding early intervention, I was very clear and I called out the governor by name specifically and said what was wrong. But it doesn't always have to look like that. Advocacy doesn't always have to be loud. It just has to be purposeful. It has to be direct. It has to be informed. It has to be justice centered. Joining your state and regional associations if applicable, and also related professional associations. For me, my state in New York, the New York State and Speech Language Hearing Association has a very low membership rate compared to the number of providers in the state. And mind you, New York is very oversaturated with providers to the point where it is hard, especially downstate, for CFs and even licensed professionals to find a direct hire job. A lot of jobs, hospitals, schools, or agency positions. So there's no reason for there to be a low membership rate. And the state associations can only do so much because if they don't have the funds from membership, how are they going to lobby for us? Regional associations, some larger states have regional associations, whether that's by region or by county. My state has several regional associations. My regional association is the Long Island Speech and Hearing Association, and we are the largest regional association in New York State. But even then, we still need more people, particularly younger people, because many individuals that are part of these associations are veteran professionals and they want to pass the torch. They want to mentor younger professionals so they can take the lead going forward. And it's not just in the speech associations. This is talking about associations in other disciplines, whether it's psychology, whether it's like education associations. In the Council for Exceptional Children, which I'm a member of, that is also another issue that they have expressed. Membership of younger professionals is low. And these changes are going to persist past the seasoned professionals. These problems are going to continue as the current younger professionals become veteran professionals if we don't address this, if we don't get involved. Volunteering looks different. It could mean volunteering with professional associations. It could mean coming together just with groups of people and just talking about the issues. What do we want to do? Are there a group of LPs in your area that have an issue that's affecting your county or your region? can you all go together and request a meeting with your elected official? At least in my state, I can do that for my state senators. I can do that for my assembly members. I can do that for most of my elected officials. I can request a meeting, and I've met with staffers. Mentoring younger professionals. And that I know is a challenge because we shouldn't be doing these things for free. Unfortunately, the landscape isn't always there, and oftentimes we are mentoring for free. But I've noticed that sometimes when I talk about these issues with more providers who have more experience than me, they are very surprised that I have done these things because I'm so young. And to that, I say is that I've experienced a lot professionally and personally, but the professionals that have supported me, mentored me, and encouraged me have lifted me up so I can do this, so I can feel like I can speak up, so I can feel like I can advocate. And I don't know if I hadn't experienced some of these challenges, if I didn't have those people in my corner supporting me even through the struggles, if I would be speaking up. Because sometimes you learn from your sufferings. Sometimes blessings comes out of suffering. And if things were always easy, maybe I wouldn't have to, because sometimes that's the response you'll get. Is like, well, I'm okay. There's no issue for me. Or, you know what? Yeah, maybe the insurance not so great, but you know, my husband has better insurance. I take care of it there. Or I only work part-time, so yeah, the caseload might be hard, but you know, I don't have to do anything about that. But that contributes to the problem because anything can happen. What if you do need to work full time again? Not to be depressing, but you know, what if you get divorced, or what if your marriage doesn't last? Then you'll need the health insurance, then that matters. Because having that mindset harms all of us. Even if it's not directly affecting you, it's probably affecting someone else. Some workplaces do have, whether it's committees or groups where they focus on advocacy. And that's an easier way if this is scary for some of us, because I know that's the first thing we all go back to. Am I going to get fired? Am I going to get fired? Am I going to get fired? So one of those things that you can always say is that I'm looking out for the business, or I'm looking out for the company, because you know what? If we make sure our providers are happy, they're not going to leave, because it costs so much money for companies to recruit and train new employees than it is to keep them. The money from posting on job boards to interviewing to then training new people is a lot. Companies want their people to stay. And I'm part of Gen Z, and it's much more common for Gen Z to job hop than other generations, because Gen Z tends to not tolerate certain things in certain work environments. But we are the future, and we need to keep people in certain settings. And if we can do that, that benefits everyone. Because when you're working, it's a transactional relationship at the end of the day. You work so you get paid. So with advocacy, you have to spin it. Same thing like when you're in an interview, when someone asks you one of your weaknesses, you kind of have to spin it. With advocacy, you have to spin it in a way as what I'm doing is for the company's interests. And I mentioned this a little bit with volunteering, but collaborating with your fellow clinicians and colleagues. I'm part of this group where we share resources, we give each other advice for our patients, our students, our clients, and we meet up about once or twice a year. And we talk about these issues. And often we all are thinking the same thing. And it just takes a couple of people to make a difference. And protecting your peace. Right now, especially, things are really heavy. Is a lot of uncertainty with changes in the federal government, even certain states' governments, in how they are trying to change education and healthcare laws. It's important to be informed because our jobs are political, because everything we do is impacted by politics. The laws that permit us to work in schools and serve individuals with disabilities, that is political. Billing is political, but it can't be to the point where you are so burnt out or depressed or anxious. Moral distress and moral injury are very real. And it's important that you are okay. Because again, going back to self-advocacy is patient advocacy. If you're not okay, how can you care for other people? We have a 24/7 news cycle. Frankly, most people, if you just watch the news once a week, you'd be fine because oftentimes the 4 o'clock news and the 5 o'clock news, I'm like, this was the same stories they were running. It's the same thing over and over. Oftentimes there's not much of a change in the details. If you watch the news on a Saturday or a Sunday, you'll get everything that would happen during the week. And be mindful of social media. Social media is addictive, and not everything on there is accurate. And I'm going to speak to especially millennials and Gen Z. Younger individuals tend to get more of their news from online, but you have to be careful and also verify the information that is being shared. Later on there, you'll see the references and you'll be able to check out these articles when I'm discussing early intervention and the problems that aren't just here in my state of New York, but across the board in this country and other countries. So it's really important to see if the person you're listening to online, if what they're saying are facts or opinions.
This is all really good advice. Can you go back to and talk about the associations a little bit about like what are some of the benefits of joining besides like, having advocacy?
Camaraderie, just sometimes we feel very alone. And a lot of times for SLPs, we might be the one person in the nursing home. We might be the one speech therapist in the school. It's oftentimes we're working solo. Sometimes, there are a bunch of therapists in a facility, other times not. Learning from colleagues. I've talked a lot about how more seasoned professionals can help younger professionals, but they also learn from us too. One of my colleagues, when I worked at a school, she was twice my age, and she said, Sophie, I've learned so much from you because think about it. You're fresh out of school, you're up to date on some of the latest research. And even though we're supposed to be doing continuing ed and we're supposed to be up reading research and learning all the time, sometimes that doesn't always happen. And they learn from us too. They'll learn the lingo, they'll learn all the technology stuff, and getting access to really cool speakers. This past conference, my regional association does a conference every fall. We had Carrie Ebert. So you get access to really good speakers, and usually the prices of CEU through your state or regional associations are cheaper. They really do try to be affordable because remember, associations are nonprofits. And just being a clinician, but in a different way. You're instead of directly talking about the problems you're facing or treating clients, you're just a lot of times there's so much joy in those environments because you're talking about, I love what I'm doing, or this was something that was amazing that happened this week. Because there are a lot of challenging parts of this profession and being a healthcare provider, but there are so many beautiful things. And I feel like sometimes we can lean too much in the dark stuff, but having that environment where all experiencing so much joy is so good for the soul and goes back to your mental health.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those. That helps to clarify some things that make it worth joining the state associations. Because I'll be honest with you, I've since not joined my
Well,
state association, but I wasn't taking advantage of the benefits. So I'll have to look back into that.
they know your state best.
Yeah, that's true. I know that it's really hard to recruit like newer SLPs into these state associations. Do you know if any of them are doing any initiatives to get newer SLPs to join?
I know for my regional association, we have free membership for students.
Oh, great.
Are in undergrad or grad school, you can get free membership. And then for CEUs, usually the price is lower for a student. And for the annual conference, you get it for free if you volunteer.
Okay.
Sometimes states they raffle off free membership. NISLA was at our conference this year and they were raffling off a free membership. And then for current members, they were giving a discount for renewal.
Oh, that's great. I vaguely remember this. It's been a bit since I've been in grad school, but I think I remember some of those benefits too for
It's not just this, like a lot of the associations, whether that's in Basla, if you can volunteer as a student, you get discounts, you get to go to things for free. And then it's great once you start in grad school because a lot of times people are forming those connections. Even undergrad, and you're building your village. I'm not a parent, but you're a parent, Benita, and it's so important to have that support system. And it's the same thing as a professional. You need your village. You need your team behind you.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, You talked a little bit about the ASHA Code of Ethics. You talked about state association. So we included links to both of those here in case anybody is interested in referencing those. And then here is a list of all of the articles that you use to pull together some of this information today. And you've indicated the quality of the study as well as if it's open access or not. And we can highlight some of these green, which are like our higher quality articles. So this one is investigating a wait and see mindset among pediatric health providers. And then you have another one here, late language emergence, a literature review. Look, she put so many awesome articles in here. So thank you so much again, Sophie, for that.
Okay.
And then a review on the early intervention systems, and that is open access. So that would probably be my like first go-to for an article that's listed here. But and then you have some moderate levels too. Like it doesn't have to always be these higher level because the way that they do the study, if it's a survey or something, is still informative. It doesn't, this is more about like looking at intervention studies. So some of these may not be actually interventions, so they are worth looking into as well. Are there any ones in particular you want to highlight?
I would say, yeah, that first one up top, that's a really good overview of
Okay.
the problems, the things that work, and it's fairly recent. It's in 2020.
Yeah.
Most of them are recent, but that one's pretty recent.
Great. Yes, thank you so much for sharing those with us. And where can everybody find and connect with you?
So on LinkedIn, you can find me by my name, Sophie Anais Renoir, Sophie hyphen Anais Renois. On Instagram, the patient provider. And you can always email me. Social media is probably a little bit easier, but you can always email me at srenoir1@gmail.com.
Amazing. Sophie, thank you so much. It started out a little bit darker in the beginning, but it ended up coming to light with all of your suggestions at the end. So I really appreciate you sharing these tips with us. And I'm sure people will be reaching out if they have questions. So thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me, Vanita.